Okay, hi everybody. I This is a question I had a lot yesterday, this kind of question, coming up with a trig function from a graph. And I did this exact question in class and I made a mistake on C, so that also gives me a chance to answer all those questions and to correct that mistake. So the first thing we're going to look for, it basically says here we got a cosine function and here's the graph of it and write down what h of x is. And so it's basically asking what's a, what's b, what's c, and what's d. So we know that a is the amplitude. So to find the amplitude, we know that the amplitude is the distance from the highest or lowest point to the middle line. And since we have the highest point, the lowest point, we know that the difference, the vertical distance between these two is twice the amplitude. So what we can do is we can take the y coordinates, 3 and minus 4, and figure out the amplitude. So I'm going to do that. Here goes. The amplitude, which is just a, is going to equal a half of the distance between 3 and minus 4, which is to find the distance we subtract. So 3 minus negative 4, which is a half of 7, which is 3.5. Okay, so that's our amplitude. Next, we're going to look for b. Now, b is related to the period. So I'm going to have to try and find the period here. The period is from any point. Well, let's take a point that we're given, this one. And we go down and we go up. And here the thing is going to repeat again. So this is one period over to here. The horizontal distance here is one period. We don't have this information, but we have this one, which is the lowest point, which we know is halfway between those two because it's a regular shape. So that means that half of the period is from minus 2 pi to minus half pi, or the period would be double that. So I can calculate the period using those two pieces of information. So I'm going to say that the period is going to equal to twice the distance between minus 2 pi, and this is distance, so we're going to take the difference, and minus negative pi over 2. And on top of that, I can see this is going to give a negative number, but the period is a distance, so we're only interested in the absolute value of that. So this is going to be the absolute value of 2 times negative 3 pi over 2, difference between 2 pi and a half pi, 1.5, and therefore it's going to be the absolute value of, the 2's cancel out, absolute value of negative 3 pi, or the period is 3 pi. So the period is going to be 3 pi. But now we also know that b, we know that the period of this graph is going to be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b, which means, if I do a little bit of algebra, that the absolute value of b is going to be 2 pi over the period, which is 2 pi over the period, which is 3 pi. So b, or the absolute value of b, is going to be 2 over 3. So we know what the absolute value of b is. All right. Now, next thing that we're going to have to figure out is we want to figure out the shift. Now, here we said absolute value of b, and we know that, and here we also had the amplitude was also an absolute value. We just got to think a little bit about the signs of a and b here. I've drawn a little cosine curve here, a standard one going from 1 to minus 1. We see it starts at the top. If a was negative, then it would flip it vertically about the x-axis. Now, if we look at this as the top and we say we haven't flipped it, then we leave a positive, okay? And when we flip about the y-axis, then we change the sign of b, so we can leave that at 2/3 and let's say that we shifted here. This became bigger by 3.5. but then we shifted to the left, and so the shift was minus 2 pi. That makes sense? So let's take this shift. I'm going to write it down. The shift equals minus 2 pi. Right? From x equals 0 goes to minus 2 pi. But we also know that the shift equals minus c over b, where b is this number here that we've already calculated, and c is the number that we want to put here. So if I do a little bit of algebra now to try and figure out what c is, because I already know what b is, I can say that, so we've got negatives on both sides, so I can just say that c is going to equal to 2 pi times b, and b we set up here is 2/3, so that is 2 pi times 2/3, or 4 pi over 3. So that's what our c is. And now we're left to find d, and d is the vertical shift. So if we find the midline, then we've got our vertical shift. So the midline is the average. It's halfway between the lowest and the highest point. So it's halfway between 3 and minus 4. And to find halfway between something, we just take the average. So I'm just going to say that d directly, d is going to equal to the average of 3 and negative 4, which is 3 plus negative 4 over 2, which is minus 1 over 2. So that's our shift. So now I can write now we've got all our a, b, c, d, and I can write out what h of x is. H of x equals, what says a was 3.5 times the cosine of b was 2/3, 2 over 3x, plus c was 4 pi over 3, minus half. And that's it.